Good evening, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the second half of our journey to anti-racism, which is one of our coffee house discussion series. Thank you for coming back, and thank you for a great session last week. Because this is our second time together, we're going to dispense with a lot of the formalities and get straight to it so that you'll have more time to spend in your discussion groups. The first thing I'd like to do is to remind you, as we take this journey, what our final destination actually looks like. And to do that, I've taken this quote that tells us that anti-racism can be defined as some form of focused and sustained action with the intent to change a system or an institution, policy, practice, or procedure which has racist effects. And I've underlined a couple of things there in particular, so we're very clear on what we're doing in this whole journey of anti-racism. It's sustained action. It's not a one-time deal. It's not a march or a lawn on the sign. It's doing something on an ongoing basis. It's a way of life. And we're not working for any one particular individual or group. We're working at a system. So we have to really get at the roots of things. And lastly, we're not just looking at the intent, but the results. Many times things are done with what people think are good intentions, but the outcome still tends to be racist in nature. So as we take this journey, that is our destination. Tonight, we're going to start with the basics of Zoom very, very quickly, since many of you were here last week, to help you navigate through this discussion comfortably tonight. And then we're going to have 3 presentations, after which you will be broken into your virtual breakout groups. And this time, we're going to hopefully have groups that allow you to have an actual conversation. You did give us some feedback on your evaluations. We thank you for that, and we use that to reshape what we're doing tonight. After you've talked in your smaller groups, you'll then be rejoined to the larger group. And then we'll have readouts where each group gets a chance to share some of the highlights, thoughts, and questions that came out of that group. And then we'll go to questions and answers, questions that you have been putting into your chat for throughout the evening. And we'll try to answer as many of those as possible live tonight using our speakers. And then finally, we'll be closing out tonight, but not closing out our journey. Let me turn it over now to my partner, Tegan Culler, who's going to review with you very quickly some of the fundamentals of your Zoom platform.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us for a second week. We're delighted to have you back here with us. If I could ask Audrey to just go ahead and click through here now. I know that most of you were with us last week, so just as a reminder, we're going to ask you to be familiar with your Zoom controls. On the left-hand side, you'll see the microphone. If you're joining us from a computer, you will see a camera icon next to it. We ask you to use those 2 controls to mute yourself when you're not speaking, and also to turn your video on so that we can see one another as we share tonight. And Audrey, if you'll just click through 2 more times, please. We also ask you to take advantage of the chat function, which is right in the middle. It'll pop up when Audrey, there it is, thank you. And if you click on the chat, it will allow you to have a conversation that you can type in. This is where we're gonna ask you to share your questions for our speakers tonight. Now, when you're in your breakout groups, of course, we'll ask you to unmute your microphone and just speak normally. But for your questions for our speakers, please use the chat function. We'd appreciate that. Also, if you have any technological difficulties, you can mouse over my picture and send me a private chat, and I'll do my best to support you. Okay, next slide. So just as a review, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Please keep your camera on. Send me a private chat if you need some assistance. And just a quick reminder, we are recording tonight's session, not the breakout rooms, just our main speakers and the report outs afterwards. So by participating tonight, you do give us your permission to record you. Thanks very much. Back to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Tegan. And so our first speaker tonight is going to be Dr. Khadija Costley White. And Khadija is an assistant professor at the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. Ms. White researches politics, social change and identity in media, and in 2018, she published The Branding of Right-Wing Activism, the News Media, and the Tea Party. Khadija has received numerous prestigious awards, including the National Association of Black Journalists, the United Nations, University of Pennsylvania Women of Color in PEN Award, and a White House internship on the Obama administration's broadcast media team. She received her PhD from the Annenberg School of Communication at the University of Pennsylvania and is a proud Swarthmore College alum. As an activist and community organizer, Ms. White has helped lead community actions against police violence, mobilized concerned citizens via social media, organized events and programs, panels, lectures, and teach-ins related to racial justice. And she is a founder of Soma Justice, a community nonprofit based in South Orange and Maplewood, New Jersey. Now Khadija will share some items that you could consider on your journey to anti-racism. Khadija? Are you muted, Khadija?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
This is one of those Zoom things where you have both the mic on your computer and on the Zoom that you have to handle. I was saying thank you for inviting me. Thank you for putting this all together. And it's really exciting that there's so many people who are interested in learning more about anti-racism work in action. I was actually gonna start with just talking a little bit about Soma Justice, if I can dive into that, Audrey. So part of the reason I'm here to talk today is just to talk a little bit about what kinds of stuff that I do locally that focuses on anti-racist work. Thank you. So we have a group called Soma Justice, which is based here in South Orange and Maplewood. It started in 2016, and it focused on trying to figure out, in a lot of ways, how to make this space habitable for people of color, particularly for Black folks who live here. When I went to high school here, I came back, and I discovered that in particular, a lot of our online community spaces were spaces where people really didn't have the words and the language to talk about race and racism. And so it first started as a Facebook group where I was hoping to do a lot of that work, to kind of post things that I teach about. I teach on race and at the university and level. And so I wanted to kind of share things that I thought were interesting or that might be useful for folks. And we ended up kind of saying, maybe we should actually meet. And in part that happened to do, I'm not sure how many folks realized that there was kind of this moment in 2017 where people were really demanding the release of videotapes connected with an attack that local police had done on young Black youth who had been pushed and forced to walk after July 4th celebration to the edges of the borders of Maplewood to Irvington, where the police kind of said they belonged. So there was this kind of moment where I think a lot of the group, CCR, Soma Justice, a lot of us kind of came together and demanded action. And so Soma Justice has been kind of working on stuff ever since. And I wanted to explain how that connects to what I think about in terms of anti-racist work. And so there's a scholar named Kamara Phyllis Jones, who I use often when I teach about what is racism. And she's a public health scholar, but she also has this kind of brilliant 5-minute video, if you ever want to check it out, called Gardner's Tale. And she explains that there are basically kind of 3 key levels of racism that people talk about when they talk about racism. And I'm sure you guys have gone over this, but right, some of that is internalized racism. What do I believe about myself? Because people say I'm inferior. Institutional racism, how do institutions and systems perpetuate racism? And then there's interpersonal racism, and that's the stuff that mostly people talk about, right? Like, did I not get hired? Did this person talk about? Did they call me a racial epithet? And so there's these 3 levels of racism that we are kind of always trying to think about, or I'm always trying to think about as a person who really does social justice work. And I actually always think of my work as intersectional. And intersectional is this notion, it was introduced through legal studies first, where people were saying, actually, we have all these laws about drugs and drug policy, but they're harming Black mothers more than they're harming anyone else, right? Black women are going to hospitals, they're getting drug tested, their babies are being taken, they're going to prison. And so out of that kind of real focus on like, what does it mean to be both Black and woman, right? And how does oppression manifest itself in the intersections? We think through intersectionality. So what that means in Soma Justice is like, we care about Blackness, we care about queerness, we care about trans identity, we care about disability, we care about all the kind of ranges in which oppression manifests itself. So that's how we approach our work. So I am going to just show you quickly what we do. So we have 3 ways that we get involved with the community. We have action, which we kind of put pressure on local officials to do the right thing. We have outreach, and we have education. And we do a bunch of different issues in terms of community action and advocacy. You can see a bunch of them here: school security, police, senior. We do a lot of stuff with the schools, and one of the things that we do every year that I think has become a public service is the BOE report card, where we kind of we evaluate candidates that are running based on their positions, and it'll be coming up. It might get crazy. It's like the craziest moment we have all year because there's a lot of tensions around it, but we think it's really important that people understand how certain candidates align with our values. So I think that's basically, we can kind of go through. So things to plug into. We're right now trying to get the BOE to really limit the amount of contact that kids have with cops and schools. We're also trying to disarm the local Maplewood volunteer police force. And so I'm actually going to jump off this meeting to go to a public safety meeting for a bit to try to get some presence there for people to advocate around that. And we do a lot of kind of food justice and school work, where we do some direct service where we deliver food to people who need it, some work connecting people to pantries and bringing food to other spaces, and stuff in school where we try to make sure that all the kids have the exact opportunities. One of the first things we did was pay off all the lunch debts for the school district so that every kid got the same meal. So yeah, I hope that you all kind of think holistically about what it means to do anti-racist work and how to think through it and approach it in your everyday life. And I hope you reach out to one of us if you want to be involved.
Thank you, Khadija. And you'll see there is a link there. I must admit that these links are not live, but we will be sending them out to you in your follow-up information. And I believe that they will also be entered into the chat. So in your individual chats, you'll be able to capture that information as well. As you can see, Soma Justice touches on many different areas that are the focus of racist outcomes. And so we want to get to the root of all those, and this is one way to consider doing that. Let's move now, if we may, to the next speaker. And don't forget to put your questions for Khadija in chat. You can do that at any point in time, now or later, and at the end of our time together, you'll get a chance to have Khadija answer as many of those as possible. Our next speaker is Ritu Pancholi, who is the president of Soma Action, another organization that's very active here in the community. And she's going to share some information with you. But before doing that, let me share a little bit about Ritu. Ritu Pancholi, Esquire, holds a BA in English and Political Science from Rutgers University and a JD in Law from Duke University School of Law. She's the founder of Culturupt, an HR employment law consulting firm, and she works passionately to help organizations build the right culture in the workplace and reimagine their existing policies to ensure that there is an equitable framework for all employees to work from. Previously, she worked as an attorney in the Office of Legal Counsel at the New York City Department of Education, assisting with charter schools, legal issues, and other education reforms, such as tenure and closing failing schools. Ritu has also served as an adjunct professor of law at Seton Hall University, where she taught conducting internal investigations. Currently, she is the president of the board for Soma Action, a local 501c4 grassroots organization whose mission is driving progressive change. She'll take now to share some of the things that they're about for your consideration. Ritu?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Audrey and team. I'm really, really excited to be here. So, just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Soma Action? Okay, looks like a good amount of people. So some people are still on Facebook. So we're much more than a Facebook group. I think that sometimes, what happens in our bubble and the bubbles that we live in is that we think, it's just a discussion board. It's just a Facebook group. Soma Action actually came together after Trump was elected in 2016. We recognized early on, the founding members recognized early on that Trump was a white supremacist and a fascist, and he was going to do away with the democracy. Obviously, there have always been systemic issues in America, but I think that Trump's presidency and what he's brought out has obviously harmed our country to a degree that we wanted to address early and quickly. And so the founding members got together in people's backyards, in people's living rooms, and really started getting involved in a grassroots way. Since then, I'm proud to say that we've incorporated, we're a 501c4, and we continue to help people in our town get involved in a progressive grassroots organizing ways. And we have a number of committees that I'm going to show you on the next slide and talk to you about. Next. Okay. So like I said, we're a grassroots organization. We're located in Soma. We're focused on driving progressive change. We consider ourselves the vehicle to drive progressive change in our towns. So our organization is generally organized by committee. I would actually urge all of you, and I'll drop it into the chat, but we have a new website. Take a look at our website. We have articles about what we've done in the past. And it very clearly shows you how to get involved and how to join one of our committees. The first committee that I'd love to talk to you about is the Racial Justice Committee. As you know, Barbara, who's a member of the CCR, is the chair of the Racial Justice Committee. Her committee was responsible for planning the violin vigil that happened in Memorial Park recently for Elijah McClain, and they continue to work on social justice issues as well as police accountability. We also have an environmental committee that's focused on protecting our natural resources, reducing waste, and solutions to climate change. We have a new communications committee, and I wanted to stress this because even if you're not drawn to a particular issue, we have a need as a growing organization to bring people in to work on discrete issues. So if you have a background in communications and you want to write an article, this is the perfect committee for you. In fact, in the most recent elections in the primaries, we sent out candidate questionnaires to everyone who was running to become a freeholder or a congressman, congresswoman. And there was a volunteer who basically raised her hand and wrote an article on what does a freeholder do? So many people do not know what a freeholder does. We've actually, I think the state has actually said that freeholders are no longer going to be called freeholders. So it was a very easy way for someone to become involved in a discrete issue that wasn't a long time commitment. We also have an immigrant rights committee. Kelly Quirk, who's the president of CCR, used to be the chair of the immigrant rights committee. They continue to advocate on social justice, civil and human rights for all immigrants. One of the key issues right now is making sure that detainees that are being held at the Essex County Correctional Site are released due to COVID issues. In addition, the committee continues to push for the county to basically phase out the contract that they have with ICE and essentially stop taking money from ICE to put detainees in our county correctional sites. The Political Action Committee is the committee that's responsible for working with representatives within and outside our district who share progressive values. Leading up to 2020, we will be looking to flip the Senate. We continue to send postcards out in swing states, and we're highly involved in that, in whatever political rights types of actions. Voting rights is another committee that's really functioning to ensure that every vote is counted in every way possible. These are just a few of the committees. We have many more committees in this. I know that Marcia, I think Marcia Bloomberg, who might be on the call, highlighted that we also have the Religious Justice Committee. They often organize and work against hate in our communities and largely bring together people from different different faiths. They organized a tea, for example, a multi-faith tea between Muslim Americans and Jewish Americans in our town that was widely attended. So please take a look at our website. I didn't want to take up a ton of time, but I highlighted a few of the committees that I thought were relevant here. So some of the work that we've done in the past, our Voting Rights Committee was actually successful in advocating for optical scanners for our voting machines. So if COVID hadn't happened and we had voted in a actual, some of us might have voted at a polling booth, but most of us didn't and voted by mail this year. But going forward, we know that optical scanners are the best way to ensure that every vote is counted, and that the machines consistently have shown us that they don't necessarily account for every vote. So on the basis of our Voting Rights Committee's work, we were able to convince Essex County that they should adopt optical scanners, and moving forward, that is the type of machine that will be used whenever you vote. We also send out questionnaires, as I mentioned, to all of the candidates who are running for office pre-primary. We publish those responses and we inform the public of our candidates' positions. We continue to remind voters in swing states to vote progressive in 2020, including in Pennsylvania. Like I said, we've advocated for the release of detainees at the Essex County Correctional Site and for a phase out of the Essex County Correctional ICE contract. We've organized and co-sponsored a number of BLM protests around town, and we continue to do so. We also, in 2018, successfully campaigned to help flip our sister districts. So we adopted West Orange and Springfield that were Republican towns, and we worked and advocated for those towns to flip blue, which they did. One of the events that I wanted to highlight is on August 9th, we will be launching a Zoom call where we will be talking about 3 states' Senate races that we are adopting. So we plan on adopting, we know for sure, Arizona, Mark Kelly, Susan Gideon in Maine, and we're looking to adopt one more state where we're looking to get rid of senators who have traditionally voted against our values. So thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Ritu. I want to just remind you, as she is saying, please put your questions specifically for her and Soma Action into the chat. And also want to remind you that the Community Coalition is a 501c3 organization, which means that we are nonpartisan. Our partner Soma Actions are 501c4 organization. So they have a little bit different shift or focus or leeway than we do. So as you look at all of the areas they cover, each and every one of them do touch upon anti-racism, or whether people are trying to restrict the vote, whether they are putting environmental hazards into neighborhoods of people of color, each and every one of the areas they're working on. So do consider this as you think about what you'd like to include in your journey to anti-racism. Now we'll move on to our third and final presenter tonight, who is my own partner, Nancy Gagne, who is the Executive Director for the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race. Nancy has been the Executive Director since August of 2008. She brings professional and academic writing, nonprofit development, public relations, and teaching experience to her role. She earned her BA from St. John's College in Annapolis, a master's in comparative literature with a focus on post-colonial studies, and a master's of philosophy in English from Columbia University, where she taught in the Literature Humanities program. She's a longtime resident of the 2 towns and has served on a number of volunteer boards and school district strategic planning initiatives, including the Achieve Foundation Board of Trustees as chair of the 2005 Board of Education Strategic Planning Initiative, as chair of Mothers and More, and as chair of the Staff Parish Relations Committee at Morrow Church. In 2001, she was elected to the South Orange Maplewood School Board, where she focused on policy development. She and her family, her husband Pierre, have 3 children, all of whom went to Seth Boyden, Maplewood Middle, and Columbia High School. Nancy is passionate about community building through intentional integration strategies and is here to talk about some of the work of the coalition with you tonight. Nancy?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to the first 2 presenters. It's amazing what great work is being done in our community. We're so excited to have all 3 of these groups in the same space, virtual space tonight. So those of you who were here last week already know some things about the Community Coalition on Race. I just put up our mission and our vision on our first slide, and you can read lots and lots about us on our website. The coalition has been around since 1996. It really began with changes in the demographics of the two towns, and people came together to commit to racial equity and integration. And over time, I can't go into all of the work or all of the achievements or progress that we've made over that time, because it's been a long time. But right now we're experiencing a different kind of demographic change and some other issues that the other two presenters have already touched on that have driven us also to consider some new initiatives that are connected and consistent with our mission. And so right now we're working on these initiatives to strengthen the community's commitment to racial and cultural inclusion of all people of color by challenging power structures, which is a lot of what anti-racism work has to do with. And that's why Audrey's definition that she read in the beginning is so important, really speaks to the issue of structures and policy. And then the second one, to ensure the sustainability of racial integration by supporting the current population of Black people. And we are working on that in multiple areas. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And you can read more about that. So we work in all aspects of community life. We've got lots of committees. Our main mission focus areas are community engagement, residential, affirmative marketing, schools. We have a demographics research group, but tonight I'm focusing on housing and schools as the two policy areas, space-related areas that are intricately tied to how we approach equity and integration in our towns. And this quote from David Rusk. David Rusk, for those of you who don't know, is a policy analyst. He was the mayor of Albuquerque. He really believed that policy is largely responsible for getting us into segregative patterns that we're in now, to the inequities that we experience as communities, and that policy can get us out of it. And we've always taken that approach as well, but we tie it to changing cultural practices and attitudes. So a sort of broad whole cloth look, so that we are working, like I said before, in all aspects of community life and not just tinkering at the edges. And we do this in the hopes that we can sever the links among place, race, and privilege. And these bullets really just speak to the reciprocal relationship between schools and housing. And we hope that when we're working on those things that these mission areas, as I said at the bottom there, that we're committed to disrupting the practices that favor a lot of white privilege in suburban spaces. And so the schools committee works on and has worked very hard for over 20 years on the racial academic achievement gap, anti-bias education training for teachers, recruiting and retaining a diverse teaching staff, community forums on racial equity and education. And don't switch yet, Audrey, I'm just gonna say a couple of little things about that. There wasn't a lot of knowledge 20 years ago about what we even meant by the racial academic achievement gap. Part of what the committee does is to bring knowledge and awareness in order to affect change. So some of it's educational, some of it's going to those BOE meetings, some of it is talking to administrators, teachers, people on the ground who can make a difference and make a change in the achievement gap. But it's also a lot of what we have to do is bringing the rest of the community along. If we don't bring parents along and change voting habits and what people are paying attention to, we're not going to have those policy changes. The anti-bias education training for teachers really does speak to what happens every day in the classroom. We used to call it cultural competency training. Now we call it anti-bias education training. It's not a one and done deal. we like to say that this has got to be an ongoing effort for teachers, administrators, anybody who faces our children on a regular basis. We also found through our demographic study that as much as people have paid attention to who's in the classroom, over 20 years, we didn't see much change in the diversity of the teaching staff. The lines are pretty much consistent over 20 years, and we have been advocating with the district to not just to change that, but to actually go with them to hiring fairs and to eventually to host our own diversity hiring fair. And because leadership changes, we have to do this over and over again. We have new superintendents, we have new people in this central office. So every time we think we've made an inroad and we've made a change, we're there to make sure that we are sticking with it. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Board of Education election forms. I know Khadijah mentioned Soma Justice's approach. We have been holding a debate. It's really like a presentation in which candidates get to address questions that are tied to our mission of racial equity and integration. Probably up until about 8 years ago, don't hold me to that time frame, but the questions, you could really hear differences among candidates. Now we see candidates mostly talk the talk. So our questions really have to be very, very pointed to get at how our elected officials are going to get at the root of change. So you will see that. We encourage you to pay attention to those forums to come. They're often live streamed. Again, we're promoting public policy changes at the district level. We have always been about supporting school and classroom integration. As I said earlier, neighborhood integration and school integration are tied to one another. If schools are integrated, it can encourage neighborhood integration and vice versa. It's really important for our classrooms to be integrated as well, and for all children to be served well and excellently. And that is behind everything that the schools committee does. All of these efforts are to support the excellent education and the equitable education of all students in the district. Another thing that they've worked on is parent engagement, because we know that there are divides, that not all parents can make conferences or committee meetings or participate in PTAs or HSAs in the same way. Not all families have the same access to digital formats. We're certainly experiencing that now, but it was very much in place even 10 years ago. So we want to make sure that parents have the right information and the right pathways to advocate for their children. Talking to children about race workshops really grew out of parents' requests for, as more and more parents came to awareness or raised their own consciousness about race, they wanted to know how to talk to their own children, to their friends, and to be sure that they were hearing the right kind of language from teachers and people who interface with children. And preschool education, we've been doing a preschool open house for many years as one of the ways to ameliorate the academic achievement gap. The residential committee works on housing issues. It supports racial integration in the two towns through pro-integrative financial incentives. In the early years of the organization, there was a loan called the PRISM loan, and the idea behind that was to give an incentive to people, in movers, to move to neighborhoods where their race was underrepresented. We can't run that loan anymore. If you have knowledge about pro-integrative financial incentives or ways to support residential integration, that is something we're really looking for more knowledge on, more support in our committee, and we are working on that now. We do still have a loan program. It's a home maintenance loan program. I'm not going to give you the details of that now. We're working on adjusting that. Part of the effort of this committee also was to provide tours to prospective homebuyers from the perspective of residents, to provide information on the community that realtors often can't and sometimes are legally barred from providing to potential homebuyers. We work with realtors on equity issues and on providing them with the best and most up-to-date information on neighborhoods, schools, things happening at the municipal level, anything that is a concern for us in putting the best face forward to prospective homebuyers based on our commitment to racial integration, always, and also so that realtors could have their concerns and questions addressed by town leaders. Neighborhood associations and block groups are a really important aspect of what we do. They're the ways that, they're the means by which people get to know one another and maybe even come into some community leadership positions, join committees, and possibly even elected office. Now, one of the things that we're working on is developing awareness of and addressing housing insecurity, and we'll go to the next slide. In addition to developing measures to forestall gentrification, certainly at this time with people out of work and salary issues, developing local resources on preventing foreclosure. We're working on developing a housing and renting mitigation workshop with realtors and other professionals in the field, trying to help people access funds for major repairs that could threaten occupancy. We don't want people to leave the community if that's a stumbling block, and also looking into eliminating fines resulting from township ordinance violations. And I just want to call attention to the picture at the bottom there. That is a fair housing statement. I couldn't give you the whole picture, from 1964. So Maplewood and South Orange have a multi-decade reputation for commitment to being non-discriminatory in selling or renting of homes. And people put their signatures to this. And we know that there are different ways of working on it today than there were in 1964. But some of the issues haven't left us, and we still have a lot of work to do. And we certainly hope that you're going to join us on that. There are so many ways that you can help us. And I think the last slide,
I think that's it.
is I'm directing you to our amazing program director, Audrey Rowe. We also have a volunteer application. Those are the the mission focus areas. I talked about schools and residential, but if you have interest in other areas of anti-racism action, some of the other committees would speak to that as well, but schools and residential is pretty much where it's at right now. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So you've heard quite a bit. If you have questions for Nancy, don't forget, not only for Nancy, but for our other two speakers as well, do remember to put your questions into the chat. You've heard a lot tonight. And just to put it in context, we're still on this journey to anti-racism. And if you recall, in our spiral journey of self-education and self-reflection, we need to take action along the way. We're not waiting to become experts. We're not waiting to become perfect. We're stepping out and getting involved in something now, and then going back to those areas of re-educating and also reflecting on what we've done and what we'd like to do later. So now that you've heard some options, I think we're now ready to think about discussing it. Having you speak among yourselves about what you've heard, what resonated with you, your thoughts, your questions, and you're going to go into your virtual breakout groups. I'm looking at Tegan. I think we're going to be in pretty good shape tonight. This is going to happen instantaneously. Each group will have a moderator, and so you will see everyone on your screen will be members of your group. The moderator will identify themselves, and their job is to help you get through this process in the most effective way. While we're in the group, please turn on your camera, because We're trying to create a sense of community, a conversation, and you would never turn your back on someone if you're speaking with them. So let's give each other the benefit of seeing who we are. Once in the group, you're going to be talking about the question that I'm going to share with you in a minute. And then you're going to get a warning toward the end, letting you know when you're about to be added back into the general session. Before that warning, your facilitator is going to check with you and just make sure that some of the key points that you've discussed and shared have been captured so that when we come back to the general group, that can be shared with all of us. So now we're going to look at what the ground rules are for your virtual groups. Ground rules are great. That's one of the things that we pride ourselves on in Coalition, is trying to create a safe space where you can really speak your mind and feel that you can do it comfortably and candidly. Tonight, we're going to, if you are called on by your moderator, you always have the option to pass. But we hope that you will feel comfortable enough to share, because that's how we learn from one another. You also should listen respectfully and not interrupt if someone says something that hits a spot for you, and speak for yourself and your experience rather than someone who's not in the room. We also want you to know that anything said in the room stays in the room. Although we are taping the overall presentation, the breakout groups will not be taped, and we ask you not to take screenshots. That way people can say what's really on their minds and on their hearts. And during the readouts, comments will be made and not attributed to any one individual. Also, we have to agree to disagree. Not everyone on this call comes from the same place. We're all on a journey, right? Some of us are at different places on that journey, so our perspective may be different. So as you share your point of view, be tolerant of others who may have a different attitude about what you're saying. And I think that pretty much covers it. I'm getting a nod from Tegan that we're pretty much ready to go into the breakout rooms. Once she hits or waves the magic wand, you will instantly appear on the screen with your assigned group. You will be in that room, and we're doing great. You will actually be in that room for 40 minutes. And you'll get a chance to share comments, thoughts, questions. And then at the end of that, after you've collected your general thoughts through your facilitator, we'll come back to the general group. So if we're all ready, Tegan, have a great discussion.
Thanks, Audrey. So as Audrey said, you'll be moved. There are a couple of people who are in, who may be outstanding, and we'll just assign you as soon as possible. Also, if you were a speaker or if you're part of our team tonight, like Audrey, for example, or Nancy, you're gonna get automatically put into a room, and we invite you to stay or come back. You are not expected to facilitate, but you are welcome to stay. I just wanted to alert you. If you exit the breakout room, I will not be able to put you back in. So I recommend that you not do that unless it's an emergency. Otherwise, you'll have to leave the meeting and come back. I just don't want anyone to be in that situation. So with that, I'm going to open the rooms. We're going to just say a little good energy up to the heavens and hope that it works a little bit better than last week. And if you're not in a room, we'll shift you around as soon as possible. Okay?
Have a great discussion.
Enjoy your discussion.
Wonderful. Okay, so we started off in your groups with the question, what actions are you considering to demonstrate and sustain your personal commitment to anti-racism? And now what we'd like to do now is to have the breakout groups actually share what things you guys discussed, including that question and perhaps other areas that you investigated. Tegan, can you share with us how many groups we actually had?
Sure. We had 12 groups, Audrey. Most of our groups had 7 or 8 people. We had one that was a little bit larger than that, but we had 12 total.
Okay. And I'm not sure whether I should identify them by number or by facilitator.
Facilitators probably know their numbers unless they've forgotten them, which is okay. So you can start with numbers, and I can support with calling out the facilitators for that room if you like.
Excellent. Let's just keep it simple. Let's start at the bottom. Let's start with group 12.
And that would be Colleen.
I was about to write you that I didn't know my number. So first I want to say to my group, apologies because I didn't get to say goodbye to you. I didn't notice the prompt that we were leaving so fast. So thanks for such a fruitful discussion. I think that the highlight of our conversation, first with respect to the actual question, I think that how folks feel like they're going to demonstrate and sustain their commitment to anti-racism work sort of fell into three different categories. There was self-education, including education of children, so like reading and figuring out ways to talk to your children about race. And then in a professional context, a couple of people talked about ways in which they might be able to open up space through their job for some anti-racist initiatives, and being mindful about that, I think, was the biggest piece on that, is to be paying attention professionally to the ways in which the individuals can plug in. And then the third is just engaging in the community, specifically some of the groups that presented tonight. And then a specific suggestion on the community that wasn't really talked about was changing the curriculum, going back to the education piece, so that we are, our community is being better educated about the pieces of our history that have been long forgotten, and their continued absence really makes it impossible for us to move forward. We also talked a little bit about the roadblocks. Thought that was another highlight of the conversation, the roadblocks so far to this place. And I think folks acknowledge that there's more awareness around anti-racism in this political arena, maybe it's the media arena, and also that it maybe people feel less afraid right now to make mistakes in a way that maybe they have been terrified of in the past. So I thought that those were both really important insights about ways in which we haven't been able in the past to demonstrate and sustain our commitment to anti-racism.
Thank you. Were there any specific questions that came out of that group other than the ones you shared?
No, I don't think that we had any specific questions. People might share in chat though.
Thank you, Colleen. Group number 11, and who was the facilitator there, Tegan?
Group number 11.
I think it was me.
Thank you.
Caroline?
Yeah, I have it written down anyway.
Thank you.
So I actually also have to apologize to my group for the opposite reason. I did see the pop-up and I accidentally clicked return to group and I cut off my own mother while she was speaking. So I do apologize for that. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. We had some similar themes. Definitely everyone, or not everyone, but there was a consensus kicking off just at how much we still need to listen and learn before or while we do other work. And someone mentioned, which I thought was a powerful highlight, needing to demonstrate a commitment to learning to oneself before trying to demonstrate it to other people. And then there was a lot of excitement about the many committees, and seeing a lane for where your talents and skills fit in, and so people wanted to look more into the different committees, and people expressed interest in seeing the breakdown in the slides again, which I'm guessing will happen anyway. But yeah, joining a committee too, we talked about wanting to step into a more long-term role that's going to last longer than, reading one book, as important as that is, but kind of wanting to take a next step. And alongside that, we talked about paralysis that we've felt before, but wanting to proactively break that paralysis for ourselves. And there was a lot of talk about wanting to kind of self-reflect on where our gifts could be, could go the farthest. So kind of identifying, a committee, or if it's like a legal aspect, or, kind of where our strengths could make the biggest impact. So kind of, a marriage between our skills and the existing programs and lanes that there are. And then we talked a lot about speaking up when our loved ones, you know, demonstrate implicit bias or racism, which is, I think, some of the hardest work there is. So we talked a lot about demonstrating an ability to sit in that discomfort and a commitment to doing it anyway.
You're muted, Audrey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, thank you. Group 10, please. Who would that be, Tegan?
Jeremy.
Yep. So we had a great conversation, and I'll apologize to my folks because I actually fell off the Zoom for a little bit and missed some of the discussion, but I think I've got the bulk of it. We started out talking about our community and how here there can be a sense that racism isn't happening here and that we feel very self-congratulatory about our community because we're sort of different from other surrounding communities, but that progressive stance is proving ineffective and it doesn't work. And we don't want to pat ourselves on the back and feel like we've solved something that we clearly have not solved. And that leaves people feeling helpless and confused. There is a sense in SOMA perhaps that breeds complacency, that other people are going to fix it, that the PTA will take care of it, that SOMA Action will take care of it. And that's not working. And we need to hold ourselves more accountable and really get uncomfortable and get outside our comfort zones and do some real work. Question is, what should that be? What can we do? And there is a sense that, we make contributions, we go to protests, but what can we do that's more sustainable than that? There was a feeling that, hey, we have more time now. We're home more often now. We're not commuting. But when it comes to something like committee work, is that something we really can commit to? It's a big time commitment. And to what lengths can we go? How can we integrate this work into our lives? One way to do it is in our work life. And there was a sense that, number one, we want to work at places that we feel are doing good. That's really important. And we want our professional lives, we want to be doing this kind of work in our professional lives. One way that people have been doing it is with recruiting and really making sure that when there is hiring going on, diverse candidates are, considered. And for some of the people who have done that, they've been really, really pleased. They've found that they have been able to find candidates and that these candidates have been terrific. And so that's been effective. Another way in our work life is by holding our bosses accountable when something comes up and, sort of when we can, calling them on that. But it's difficult with your boss and everyone's on a different, as Audrey talks about, on this journey of anti-racism, we're all in different places. So that's not always so easy. But beyond our work life, we do want to bring it local. And what seems to really jump out for people is fighting for our kids and making education a top priority. And it was really interesting in our group because some of the people were parents, others were relatively recent CHS graduates. So we sort of had both sides in terms of education. But everyone agreed that, stepping up there and putting our money where our mouth is and fighting to close the achievement gap is really, really important because so many other problems can stem from that. And if we can sort of focus on that, maybe that is, can be really effective. And that's where people want to do the work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. Let's go to group 9. Facilitator.
Catherine.
Hi, that's me, Audrey. And as you know, we had a great discussion in group 9. I'd like to thank all of the participants in room 9. And I'd also like to apologize that we were just ran out of time at the end, but we had a very good, similar to what other people have said, the sort of key issues that came up, the sort of areas were very similar. One was in the personal sphere around our own personal power and the individual choices we make as individuals and how we can show up and educate ourselves and then move from education into action. Part of that discussion was also around how ready we feel to act, around what blocks there might be or how feelings have changed from feelings of being overwhelmed or paralyzed into feeling more willing and ready to act and finding ways to act. We also spoke about how on that action point, the great presentations from the sister organizations locally. And so from that, voting rights was an issue that we discussed. That was an issue that that was important to some of our participants. And Soma Action is obviously that has a great opportunities for action there. We also spoke about local grassroots action in general around education, schools, Board of Ed. One of our participants was actually directly involved in that which was great. We also talked about the policing in schools that Dr. White mentioned in her presentation about Soma Justice, about how to get police out of schools or issues around policing in schools. We also then spoke, similar to what others said, around the workplace. We had a diverse group of people in terms of what they did and how changing and responding to racism and Black Lives Matter is manifesting in workplaces. So we had fruitful discussion around changing recruitment practices, looking at where freelancers come from, interns come from, where recruitment, how to actually recruit and retain and amplify Black people and people of color in the workplace. This also carried over into there was some talk around alumni discussions, and then there was around the residential issue. We spoke about the difference between living in a diverse place versus being anti-racist, and how it's similar to what Jeremy's group in particular said about being we're okay in Soma because it's a diverse place, but that's clearly not the same as being anti-racist or being committed to anti-racism. And so how education moves us into beyond the being in a diverse environment into actually being anti-racist. And as part of that discussion, we actually had a good talk about the Coalition's demographics report. And I think I've captured everything, so I won't, but any Group 9 can put the questions into the chat for the presenters. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Let's move to Group 8.
That's me. So we had a good discussion in Group 8, and thank you.
This is Kelly, right?
This is Kelly, yeah, for participating. We had people who had very different ideas of where they wanted to channel their action-related energy. So there were folks who were talking about doing electoral work. There were folks who were talking about schools and education. We had someone not from our two towns, not from South Orange Maplewood, who was kind of using this as a model to help think through how they could do things in their own community. We also spent a bit of time talking about the process of these two events being helpful and having homework in between to be accountable, so that reading about anti-racism in and of itself isn't enough, but tying it to concrete actions and tying it to follow-up conversations are super important. And I am trying to think one of the other things that came up for our group was sitting through discomfort and working through discomfort that's intergenerational when people are having conversations around race in their families, both skewing older, but also skewing younger, and feeling that there's so much that is changing in language, and wanting to be present and attuned, particularly to folks who are younger, and to allow themselves to be called in, and to sitting with discomfort about that was another part of our conversation. And I will. The other part, it's sort of a question or a summary for us at the Coalition, is for folks who maybe left the presentations tonight still wondering where do I fit? I want to look at these PowerPoints and see, do I want to go here? Do I want to do this committee work? Where do I want to go? Is using the CEI Institute, I think, or that sort of committee, to reach back out in a month and say, hey, maybe we can match you. Let's talk a little bit more, or let's have another conversation about how we can find your best fit.
Okay, thank you so much. And in terms of people leaving, once again, this group is amazing. We had 88 people who joined us, and 84 of us are still here. So kudos to people making commitment and being serious about learning this information, internalizing it, and using it. Let's move on to Group 7. That facilitator is?
So, hi, it's Kristen. I was the facilitator for Group 7, but actually one of our members asked if she could share the recap, and that's fine with me.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to turn it over to Lizzie.
Hi, I'm Lizzie. For some reason, I'm biracial and I identify as Black, but I ended up in a room with all lovely white ladies, which is fine with me. But some of the things that they have been working on, we had several lawyers in the group. One of the lawyers, she joined a book club, and their focus is about getting rid of white supremacy. She also volunteered to be a person who is hashtagged when someone is being ganged up on social media around racial discussions.
Oh
You
my goodness.
hashtag white nonsense roundup, she will pop up, and she's a lawyer, so she can help that person make their argument and support. I just love that. Then we had another lawyer who's been in Maplewood for over 40 years. I'm sure you all know her well. I won't say her name, but she's been on every committee that we've talked about tonight, or most of them at least, and she hasn't seen much change over the years. She's one of those ones you see in the protest going, I can't believe I'm still protesting this bleppity blip. So she's depressed about it, but I think she's done more good than she gives herself or her work or her team's credit for, because she's still showing up, and she's raised kids who she's talked about in the group who are protesting and stuff like that. And she's heartened. She actually admitted at the end that she's heartened by the Black community and how they're stepping up and self-advocating. So it was great. That we had another lawyer in the group. She wants to volunteer in the schools to make access to support programs like the IEP and stuff like that more equitable, and to advocate on their behalf, which I think would be great. There was someone who wants to make content. She works in media, and she wants to make the content more diverse and the staffing more diverse. And there was another person involved who wants to lift up writers of color in children's books. She works and she writes children's books, and she wants to help support people of color in writing children's books. There was someone who wants to make my whole, she said, my whole education feels like a lie. So she's working to improve situations in schools, like getting more books that raise awareness and provide more truthful education. So there were a lot of activities that people are involved in, and it was very inspirational.
Thank you so much for that, Liz. Good to see you.
I take good notes.
Thank you for stepping up and volunteering. We appreciate that. Let's move on to group number 6, and the facilitator is?
Me.
That would be Barbara Velasquez.
Yes, we had really interesting conversation. Several of our older members made note of this, and then it seemed like, yeah, the rest of us kind of saw what they were saying, and that they've been having this conversation and the same issues since the 60s. So yes, definitely there has been movement. We've stopped the egregious racism that existed in that time, but not much has been done to change systemic racism. As a matter of fact, not even sure the concept of systemic racism became widespread until, maybe the last 20 years or so. And we are not, there was some conversation about whether or not this was on a higher turn of the spiral, where we dealing with racism, very slowly but surely. And some felt that racism was so deep-seated within this country is that we were moving at a higher turn of the spiral, but it's so deep-seated that movement and change is almost glacial, to see actual change and to to deal with the depth of systemic racism will actually take quite a few turns of the spiral. Some of the thinking is that what's been very helpful is that racial incidents and things have become much more available. They've been cameras have taken pictures of and videos of what's been happening. It's available on TV. It's a much quicker world where things happen and people find out about it immediately. So I think that is one of the ways in which awareness is being more greatly increased than it was over in the 60s. And also any advancement in racism has always been met with a backlash, so that we've had improvement in the 60s, and then we came with the 70s and Reagan, and then we had Obama, and now look what we have now. There's always been some kind of backlash, so you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Okay. Anything else?
One more quick thing is that because someone else also mentioned that we cannot allow this to having this process continue where we don't really make a difference. This is going to continue to happen this way unless we really do make the commitment. Commitment is critical, because otherwise we'll still be going back and forth, having the same conversation over and over again, unless people truly are committed to make change, particularly on the part of whites, to have an honest conversation about dismantling oppressive systems.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Let's move on to group number 5, the facilitator.
It's Ed Stewart.
Thank you, Ed.
Hi. We had a small group, and each and every one was already an activist, pretty involved. And we realized there's a lot more work to be done, and especially educating ourselves and the rest of the populace with some of the issues that have been coming out, especially as Black Lives Matter cranked up. And we talked a lot about the need for more to be done in the schools with curriculum and diversity of teachers, and that the youth have sort of taken over as the fiercest activists, and that we should really be paying attention to what they have to say. They do have a lot to say. And we mentioned, Nancy made mention of the fact that the coalition is establishing a Soma Youth Collective to do just that, to pay more attention to what the youth have to say. And we then got off on how do you behave, what do you say, how do you react when somebody says something that's offensive, and got into the whole conversation about how language is important and how it is constantly changing, and we have to pay attention as the definitions of some of the terms have changed over the years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ed. Let's move to group 4.
Okay, that was my group, Diane. So I'm going to keep it short. I see the time, but that our group was a combination of people who were involved in the community already, who had done some really interesting things, from the Duran Hedden House piece on slavery, and that they're working to put together a booklet to have more accurate history about slavery and give it to the school systems or integrate it into the school. And people who have experience with criminal justice and national incarceration program. And it was, the conversation was, they've learned so much by doing these things, but it's like experience of this is the tip of the iceberg almost, and still there's so much more. It like opens the door to so much more to know that what has to be done. But even more so on a more personal level was the experience of a mom who's super busy, who wants to do it when she can do some work, but really work around educating her children. And the piece about diversity audit of books that she had for her children and realized that she needed to create more diversity. We also had a member from the library who did work with the students from the middle school after school and also connected with that diversity audit piece. But it was really, we talked about creating a diversity audit of our community, of the people in our lives. And then it kind of merged into how hard it is, even like in a neighborhood that may be diverse, but it's like all the children in the, in the cafeteria are sitting together, right? That reference, but that how hard it is to break the ice and have a conversation and have a real meaningful relationship with people who are diverse, even in your own community who may live next door to you. And so so there is that very personal one-on-one level action all the way to the big work on a national incarceration level. So there's a lot of variety. But something that also, one other piece that stood out was just a sense of taking ownership for what one sees in the world and feeling like now even just voting matters because how important it is currently in relationship to everything going on here.
Thank you so much, Diane. Excellent. Let's keep moving forward. Group 3?
That was me. Group 3 was with me.
Is that Brianna?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
So our group, we had a nice array of ages. So we had a lot of different life experiences that were shared. But the overarching theme I think that we all came to was that each of us are at different points in our action plans for our commitments to fighting social justice and working on this journey towards anti-racism, but also just validating that that's okay. And just identifying what that next step is and what your next step is going to be in your own personal journey. So basically, initially, it's just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and finding your niche and wherever that niche is, what your passion is, and kind of diving headfirst into that and committing to that. One of the things that came up was tracking in the school system and how, that's something that has been a part of SOMA's trajectory for some time now. So getting involved with the Board of Education, a participant brought up about how the demographics have changed greatly in Maplewood South Orange over just even the past 20 years. So getting involved with housing and realtors, as was shared with Soma Action. And then just another point was working on finding the balance of being respectable, but also stepping in and being that ally and addressing something or a situation when there is some form of discrimination being experienced, or just a situation where someone is being oppressive and having that guts to kind of step in and address it and feel fierce enough to do that. So overall, it's just, a lot of the participants were talking about their own personal development on a personal level, but working towards getting more involved on a systemic level, but realizing that the buzzword of this discussion is a journey, it's not a sprint. So being okay with where you are, but identifying what next step is best for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Group 2?
Layla?
Get myself unmuted here. We had a very interesting discussion, in many ways mirrored what others have already reported. I think the primary theme in our group had to do with educating youth, whether that was through the schools and being active to be sure that the schools were really emphasizing the understanding of racism and the behaviors that we need to avoid and so forth. So there was that emphasis on the school environment, if you will. But there was also a an underlying theme with that in terms of people who are interacting with their own kids. In most cases, I would say teenage level kids, and that they were trying to engage in conversations with them to help them learn a little bit more about this whole issue that we're struggling with, and in particular to work with specific groups like the LGBT students in the schools and kids with special needs. So that was a whole segment of our conversation. Another piece that came up, which I hadn't heard from others, but I think might be an interesting area for action. One of our group wanted to look at zoning issues and how those affected both schools and housing, and where there might be some room to really change any rules that were inhibiting us from being a fully integrated and welcoming community. And then there was also everybody said that they were on the journey in the part of learning about themselves and doing a lot of reading and thinking and having dialogues with other people and so forth. So it was sort of a combination of what we were calling reflection and learning last week and the beginnings of actions. As with other groups, a number of the folks in ours were already involved in something. Finally, another theme that emerged a number of times was the issue of voting rights and what's going to happen with the elections and how soon people want to get involved, whether it's phone calls, postcards, any other activities that they can do. So they're very anxious, I think, to become involved in that part of our work for the next few months. And then a final theme back a little bit to the learning stage. One of our participants talked about some reading and blogs and so forth that he had been focusing on around the idea of racialized trauma, which I think is a term that not everybody is familiar with, but he gave some really excellent resources, as did some of the other members, for delving into that area as part of our learning.
Okay.
And finally, we finished up with a quote from Robin DiAngelo that Ria Beck offered, that we should do one brave and uncomfortable thing each day. So that kind of set the tone for us as we finished up our discussion.
Thank you so much, Leah. I like that. One brave and uncomfortable thing each day. Let's move on to our final group, Group 1.
That's Judith.
Unmute your mic, Judith.
Yes. Our discussion was more of an extension of what was discussed last week. So I apologize to my group for bringing them there, but there was a lot that was said that was quite important. We talked about how important it is for white people to talk to each other, to guide each other as they travel this path. They also talked about how important it is to listen and being willing to be uncomfortable at times, and also being willing to struggle with some of the issues as they come up. We also talked about the insidiousness of racism and how it shows up in different sectors, particularly in school. Someone said that they think that racist teachers should be fired. Also, many in the group, many participants discussed the emotional shift that's taking place with them and how they are reassessing their lives and addressing the issues and taking personal steps. Someone even mentioned something about removing a camera so that the police cannot ultimately use it to do harm. The participant also made very clear that there's a lot of anger, and he used the word rage, actually, because he feels like he was misled in that the education that he should have received was not given to him as far as the consciousness of race and the racism that exists.
Okay.
And that's basically it.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate the patience of all of you as we went through our groups and the breadth of information that was shared. The whole intent of this is for us to connect not only with our own thoughts and feelings and commitments, but to hear how some of our neighbors and friends and colleagues are dealing with these issues as well. What we're going to do now is and I'm looking at the time, we're going to, if you will allow us to extend our time, we had hoped to end at 9. We're going to extend it another 10 minutes perhaps or less, but we do want to take time now to see if there are some trends and questions that came up that Tegan's going to offer to our presenters, whom I hope are still on the line with us. That would be Khadija, Ritu, and Nancy. Tegan, are there any questions a few you could share?
So I want to let you know a couple of things. One, Dr. White had to continue at the policing meeting, and so Melissa Rennie is here to answer any questions in her stead. So thank you, Melissa. And I'm not sure if Ritu is still on the line. I will say that many of the questions that were posed have already been answered in the chat.
Okay.
Everyone was very quick about getting back. So I want to just give a couple of things that did come out, and I will see if also if at this time people have additional questions, I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to ask them. So I'll let you gather your thoughts. I'll just note a couple of more statements in relationship to Dr. White's presentation. A number of people had said that they were not aware that Maplewood has a volunteer police force. They're interested in hearing more about both the police force and Soma Justice's actions in terms of the groups that are working with making the police force more equitable and also currently working to disarm them. So there is some interest in that. We had one question that maybe Melissa can speak to. If it wasn't already answered in the chat, I apologize if I've missed it, which is that Dr. White, are you having any more lawn chair conversations coming up? And ways to follow Soma Justice for folks who are not on Facebook?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but we're trying to build out a newsletter. We're still kind of getting that up and running, but while we are predominantly on Facebook, we can email things out as well. So we do have an email address at Gmail. It's soma4justice@gmail.com. I'll type it into the chat just by itself so that anybody can see it. And then if you have any questions or want to get involved and you're not on Facebook and can't join the Facebook group, email us there. We also have an Instagram page now and a Twitter account. So if we are having events or other things, we'll be posting them there. And so those are other ways to get involved with us. And then we hope in the next few months to have a newsletter where we would be able to email out events and upcoming activities.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I wonder if anyone had additional questions related to Dr. White's presentation or questions for Melissa around Soma Justice, and then I'll make a call for Ritu's presentation as well. Okay. Thank you. And Ritu was able to very quickly answer a lot of the questions that came up about activities that Soma Action has taken in the chat. So we had questions around the actions for District 11, and we had a note around that. I don't know, Ritu, would you like to speak to those pieces there?
Yeah, sure. So in the midterms during 2018, we did, when we adopted our two sister towns, West Orange and Springfield, we worked very closely with the progressive groups in both towns. In fact, Soma Action has become so well known to other grassroots organizations throughout the state. We're part of Take Back New Jersey. We're all coordinating. It's quite coordinated at this point. The progressive groups are working together hand in hand on pretty much everything. So we get requests to sign on to all sorts of things, including, I think Mikey Sherrill's probably safe in NJ11 in the 11th district, but I don't know about Malinowski. And Malinowski obviously won in 2018, and he represents Short Hills, Milburn, Chatham, those kind of towns. So, look to Soma Action. We will be posting about how to continue to support Malinowski in the 2020 race.
Okay.
Thanks. And one more question that came up that you, Richa, you may want to give some more details on. We had some questions around the questionnaires for BOE candidates, because there was a set that Khadijah described and also a set that you had described. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So our most recent questionnaire focused on the ballot races that were on your ballot. So if you voted by mail, then for example, the freeholder races were on the ballot. Your congressman, like CD10 was on the ballot. The delegates, Biden, like the presidential candidate, was on the ballot. But the Board of Ed wasn't on this race. So we focused this past, the race that just happened, on sending out questionnaires to all of the candidates who were on the ballot, including Republicans. Of course, the Republicans never answer our questionnaires, but we send them, we do our part. But we published everyone's responses that we received, and the BOE race, we do not get involved in the local BOE race because traditionally there have been other vehicles such as Soma Justice or PAIRS or even CCR's, town halls and debates, I think, that are informative. And therefore, Soma Action hasn't really waded into that territory and probably will keep away from it because, we consider all of these organizations to be our sister organizations. And if one org's already doing it, then we would rather just co-sponsor.
Right. Excuse me, Tegan, can I interrupt? I'm looking at the time and I'm watching as our numbers start to drop off. And we appreciate everyone for staying on with us at this point, but we would like to certainly get to the end so everyone knows the follow on. How many questions do we have remaining that we need to handle now as opposed to put on the website?
Audrey, only one, because it leads us directly into your next piece around our follow-up. So a question in the chat, not directed towards any of our speakers, but in general regarding this event. Is there a plan to create dialogue opportunities between white and Black discussants? I am white. My group last week was all white and the same this week. I would like an interracial dialogue opportunity. Thank you.
May I speak to that?
Please do.
Yeah, for those of you who've had the opportunity to participate with us in the past, you know that typically all of our conversations are relatively well integrated, representing the percentages in our town. So meaning that we have about 32% people of color, and very often in our meetings, that's the kind of mix that we have, and we try to have mixed race groups. This particular topic, however, tends to be one that most people view as being most relevant to people who are not of color. When we talk about anti-racism, when we talk about allyship, we're talking about the people who are not Black, but who support anti-racism and who want to know how to get better at that. So basically, we have the audience that we intended. And for someone who's not familiar with our past gatherings and with this particular topic, I could see how this could be concerning. But quite frankly, from our standpoint, it was mission accomplished. And we will, as always, continue to have conversations that are interracial, multiracial, and we will make sure that everyone, including people on this call, get involved in that. But for this particular topic, we felt that it was very much a good mix. And so to that gentleman, we ask you to stay tuned. We will definitely be having other topics related to this particular issue, and we hope that you'll be with us to get an opportunity to share conversation with other residents and neighbors who may not be of your particular racial group. And thank you for that question. Is that it taken pretty much for now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's move quickly on because the hour is getting late and we appreciate everyone's patience. What we want to go now is we're coming to the very end. What now? What do we do now? And so the three things that we want to put before you is, as we started to say, this is a journey. We're not at the destination, which is anti-racism. And I don't even know if we can see it in our sights, but we know the direction we're headed. And so to continue on this journey, we put the onus and responsibility and accountability on each of us to continue to self-educate, not to look for someone else to hand feed you the information, but you go and find it. You go and look for it. We have given you some resources, but this is just the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. If you use those resources, and they have a lot of range, depending upon your style, whether you like looking at a movie or reading a book or listening to a podcast, there's lots there to continue to educate yourself with. So continue that, and then taking the time to think about, what does this say to me and what do I do with it? Because the journey's not complete without action. You're truncated, you're stopped in your right in your tracks if you're not moving to some action. Secondly, and we hoped that tonight would help you get to this second point, select a specific project or program as soon as possible and become involved. If you're talking about voting rights, see yourself in that action. What specifically am I able or willing to do around voting rights? Not just identify a group, but step into that situation and specifically take on a task. And then thirdly, as you continue on your journey, we in the coalition have prepared to support you. And so we are forming or morphing back actually a group that we already had in progress into what we're now calling the Anti-Racism Support Group. So there's going to be some accountability and some follow-up. And we're going to be reaching out to each and every one of you to see where you are, to see where you're stuck. Have you identified a particular organization or cause that you're going to work with? What more do you need to be able to make that identification so that you're not out there alone? And this will not just be a one point of one contact. We'll be following up with you on an ongoing basis. Our objective is to see all 88 of you who joined on with us tonight actually connect with something that uses your power to impact and to execute anti-racism, because it's systemic, which means the roots grow deep. It's going to take a lot of people doing a lot of work on a sustained basis to really make an impact. So that's the plan. We are eager to do our part. We're looking at you and hope that you are going to do your part. And now I'm going to turn it over to close out our leader at the coalition, Kelly Quirk.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to say again, thank you all for joining us in this 2-week process. I know it's late, so I'll just say thank you to the committee that put this together and put a lot of work and thought into this. Thanks to Audrey and Tegan for continually being our MCs over the last 2 weeks. We have a survey we'd really love for you guys to fill out. And in addition to sort of the accountability work here, there's some other upcoming events from the 3 groups you saw tonight. We'll be doing a 2-part series on policing with our planning the first one for some time in September and the second one sometime in November. That's my computer telling me it's almost out of battery. So just wanted to say thank you, keep looking out for that, and also join us for our Conversations on Race. We've been hosting that event for, I believe, 20 years or more. So that is going to be with Jaylani Cobb in October. It'll be in a digital format, and it will have that opportunity to learn more about white supremacism, go deeper, and have sort of those interracial conversations that some of us are craving at this point in time. And, you know, just keep doing the work, keep learning. And I think Layla quoted Rhea, who quoted Robin DiAngelo, but there was a long time where I think we all existed in safe spaces and had conversations in safe spaces, and it's time for us all to be brave and be having conversations and doing work in brave spaces. And so thank you for taking those first steps.
And if you would be so kind, as you did last week, to go to this link, I believe that it's also in your chat, and you can click on it. And if you would stop right now and spend 3 more minutes to give us your feedback, it's so critical to help us design and execute what we all need as a community to get at this insidious anti-racism. Last week, we had 76 people who took the time to give us feedback, and we were actually able to remodel some of what we did tonight based on your feedback. So if you would just take that time, it would really, really be appreciated. Our thanks again to the Maplewood Library, who loaned us their platform tonight to be able to have more people in conversation in our breakout rooms. We also have one of their associates who spent the entire evening with us tonight. We thank him for joining us tonight. And we thank our speakers and our sister organizations, Soma Justice, Soma Action, and of course our own Community Coalition on Race. And mostly we thank you, especially those of you who took the time both weeks to be with us. But let this be the beginning. Let this be the beginning. And as the last slide says, if there's going to be a change, we need to be the change that we need to see, we want to see in this world. Thank you. Before you click off, do go and take the survey. And have a good evening. I'll stay here with you a few seconds while you finish your survey, and we welcome your comments.